Good afternoon, everybody. Wherever you're joining us from all around the world, we've got a really global audience today. Welcome to this webinar on leading digital transformation. I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm chairing this webinar on behalf of the publishing house Global Government Forum, who supports civil servants all around the world. And I'd also like to thank our knowledge partner today, Palantir Technologies. Thanks very much for joining us today and lending us your support. Now, governments around the world were already working on digital transformation programs before the pandemic hit, but the past 18 months have really forced them to change the way they work, moving services online, switching staff to remote working, sharing data in new ways, trialing new processes and cutting through bureaucracy. And as the crisis eases, further changes will be required as governments rebuild their economies, restore public spending and accountabilities. But that really shouldn't mean a return to business as usual. Digital transformation can increase efficiencies, improve public services, but it will require leadership. How can leaders implement digital reforms in ways that both meet their responsibilities to taxpayers, citizens, and elected leaders, while retaining the pace of change that was achieved during the pandemic? We've got an expert panel with us today, and we'll be exploring all of those issues and challenges. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce the panel, but there will be time after they've spoken for you to put forward your questions, and we will answer as many of those as we can. So while you're listening, please do use the Q&A function that you have. You should find that on the bottom of your screens to message in any questions that you have, and we will try and take as many of those as we can after the panel have spoken. So now to quickly introduce our fantastic panel, we have Craig Eblett, who is Digital Delivery Director at the Department for Work and Pensions here in the UK. Since joining the civil service in 2002, Craig has held senior digital roles within DWP and the Cabinet Office, and he's also the sponsoring director for digital engineering and leads on building reusable application components as part of DWP's strategy to digitally transform the organisation. Then we'll head over to Canada, where we'll hear from Dr. Vic Pant, who is Chief Scientist and Chief Science Advisor at Natural Resources in Canada. Vic is responsible for providing strategic direction to build capacity within Canada's scientific community, promoting a vision for science and technology, and an assessment of future needs. Amongst other things, he's responsible for accelerating the creative application of innovative digital technologies, including artificial intelligence, and he works with counterparts across the Canadian civil service. Then we'll hear from our knowledge partner, Scott Adams, who is the UK government lead for Palantir Technologies. Scott has led digital transformation programs across many of Europe's largest private and public sector organizations and overseen some of the largest data integration projects to have taken place within the UK central government and healthcare in recent years. Then we go over to Korea to hear from Songju Park, who's Deputy Director for Digital Government Cooperation Division in the Ministry of Interior and Safety in the Republic of Korea. She's in charge of multilateral cooperation on digital government, facilitating her ministry's cooperation with organizations including the OECD and a host of international bodies around the world. And last but absolutely by no means least, we'll hear from Alison Pritchard. Alison is the Deputy National Statistician at the Office of National Statistics in the United Kingdom. She's had a fascinating career across a range of departments, has spent 5 years in Saudi Arabia with the UK Defence Programme, led the independent review of the Royal Family and Ministerial Air Travel, and was responsible for gambling and the National Lottery. And before moving to the ONS, Alison was Director General of the Government Digital Service throughout a lot of the pandemic. So we'll be able to give both of those perspectives. So I'm sure you'll agree we have a truly expert panel here. So please do message in your questions and pick their brains as much as you can during this webinar. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Craig to kick us off with some opening remarks.
Thanks very much, Siobhan, and thank you. And I feel very esteemed to be part of this excellent group of panelists, so thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Given that this is a global conference, just a quick introduction. I work for the Department for Work and Pensions, which is the UK's largest civil service department. About 1/4 of all civil servants work in the Department for Work and Pensions. We have just over 100,000 employees, and we provide services to 22 million citizens in the UK. And we provide many, many different services and benefits. It's just not just one thing, it's many things. I also had the privilege of leading the digital group response to COVID on behalf of the department, and really what a privilege that was too. From a citizen perspective, the department was actually really quite well placed to deal with the pandemic. Many services were completely uninterrupted, and we dealt with a huge surge of demand with people making claims, for instance, to unemployment benefit. But our recent investment over the last 5, 6, 7 years in new benefit systems like universal credit, which is the flagship unemployment benefit for DWP, really stood up extremely well. Where we were less well equipped though was in providing our agents, our staff, with the ability to work remotely. And at the start of the pandemic, we had around 5% of our staff could work successfully remotely, and the rest was a face-to-face service provision. But we rapidly, within months, we rolled out many tens of thousands of devices, and we now stand at about 95% of the department that can work remotely. And that is just a huge organizational shift that we've been through. However, we do support the most vulnerable in society. And that also means they're not digitally literate, not digitally aware, or have the digital capability to work with us as a department. So we've also had to maintain services, face-to-face services, right through the pandemic for supporting citizens in that particular position. What we did find out during the pandemic is many services that we would previously have thought would have taken years to build and implement, we were actually able to go and deliver in days and weeks or a few short months. So we, as a digital function, saw a rapid increase in outputs and outcomes from many of our teams, whilst we were also shifting towards as well. So we saw some of the real benefits of that. We've learned many lessons. We've also seen quite a few downsides of this and how we're working, and hopefully we'll get into that in the Q&A section as well. In September last year, as the brunt of the work of the COVID response for Digital Group eased off, we started work on a new strategic direction for digital services in the department, which is very completely aligned with the overall direction of the department. What we're trying to do is put the citizen at the heart of all of our services and products, not just individual products and services. We've been very good at that. We've got lots of experience of doing that. But providing a really joined up service, that's where we need to go now. Many people who work with the department come and access our services. It's not one service, it's multiple services, and they get a disjointed view of the department. So we need to break through that and really do something very, very different. But overall, we've been on a journey in the last 10 years of insourcing capability. You know, we've had the real support from GDS from 2010 onwards to really think about how we deliver, really focus on product, service, building capability. And without these, I don't think we will have fared anywhere near as well as we have through the COVID response. We're taking that, we're continuing to build our internal capability whilst working with third parties as well. It's absolutely not a one or the other, it's a combination of the two. And we're really looking forward to applying these lessons from COVID and then putting the citizen in the heart of our services in our new strategic journey. And I'll try my very best to answer as many Q&As in the window as I can, but I look forward to the general Q&A section as well. But back to you, Siobhan.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Craig. A really good way to start there, because I think you set out the challenge nicely, both in terms of organisations having to ensure their staff could work remotely, so the digital challenge there, but also, as you said, it's not easy when your own customers, I guess you could say, or the citizens that you serve, not all of them might be digitally literate, so you have to make sure that you can reach everybody, so there's a complexity there. And then really interesting what you said, which I'm sure other people will pick up on, the need to build capability so that you really can learn the lessons from what you were doing before the pandemic, but also the lessons you've learned during, in terms of placing the citizen at the heart of everything we do in government and the public services. So brilliant opening. Thank you so much, Craig. Vic, I'm going to come over to you now.
Thank you very much, Siobhan, and also thank you to the Global Government Forum team. So Kevin, Maria, Melissa, and George, the awesome team for putting these excellent events together. It's my pleasure to also participate in this conversation with my esteemed co-panelists. So thanks everybody for having us. Today I'll talk about a very interesting initiative that we launched in the Natural Resources Canada, the department where I have the good fortune of being employed, around what's called the Digital Accelerator, which is essentially this launch pad for innovative technologies to help our department leapfrog sort of in a non-linear, discontinuous, asymmetrical sense, to really take advantage of all that these emerging technologies have to offer. And I'll get into a few examples. And most importantly, I'll share some of the lessons learned retrospectively looking back 18 months or so. Next slide, please. So our department really relies on data. In fact, I can say that digital solutions are central to our department being able to fulfill our commitment to data-driven decision-making and evidence-based policy making. If you think about it, our knowledge informs our policy making, and the way that we acquire that knowledge is by analyzing data. But of course, it's a virtuous circle when done the right way, because when you know what kind of data you need, you go about using advanced digital solutions to collect those data, to analyze those data, and then in turn, those data improve and incrementally update your understanding of the world and help you be more knowledgeable, which allows you to make more effective decisions and more efficient policies. So digital solutions are really the bridge that connects, if you will, the data world with the knowledge world. And both of these need to be really balanced and managed in a very delicate way to ensure that we can maximally improve the value that we can appropriate and apply from data. So next slide, please. So one of the things we did in our department was to launch something called the Anarchan Digital Accelerator. I have a link to the website on the last slide, so please check out our website whenever you wish. And it had 4 goals. The first goal was, as Siobhan kindly mentioned, the creative application of innovative technologies to advance science policy integration. So we are a science-based economic department. Science informs our economic policy making, and certainly our economic priorities, economic policy priorities, I should say, then essentially guide our science in terms of priorities and imperatives there as well. So it's a very good, healthy, mutually symbiotic relationship between our science colleagues and our policy colleagues. So the one thing was, how can we use these types of emerging digital technologies, such as artificial intelligence, data science, etc., to really elevate our game in that respect. The second thing also, Siobhan touched upon in her response to the first presenter, was really this notion of culture. And we want to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where you have a group of experts sitting in some corner somewhere, and they're the ones who are the knowledge holders when it comes to the application of these digital technologies. But really, there is, to some degree, this diffusion, this infusion of digital acumen, I like to call it, a digital quotient throughout our department. So not expecting everybody to become a digital expert, if you will, but everybody, so that if they are interested, can have access to some learning opportunities and some knowledge sharing opportunities where collectively our department can move towards a more data-centric, data-informed culture. The third piece was, we always like to say, nobody knows everything and everybody knows something, which is why these events are great, is that this gives us an opportunity to tell folks around the world about what we're doing. If there's opportunities to partner, if you're doing something which could be simpatico, then we're very happy to engage with you as a partner. And indeed, what we did was we founded a number of very interesting partnerships, which I'll talk about in the next slide, with world-leading software companies, with world-leading financial organizations that also have extremely large software complements. And so really a different way of partnering than is traditionally the case in the government context. And last but not the least, to make this scalable, to make this sustainable, do so in a way that complies with and abides by all of the governance mechanisms in our department. After all, in government, we have to make sure that there's proper oversight, there's proper compliance, there's proper monitoring. And so we just wanted to make sure that everything that we were doing was fully transparent and fully visible to decision makers at every level of the organization, A, just from the perspective of governance, but B, also to build credibility and to earn their trust and goodwill. Next slide, please. So our model's been really quite successful. We've delivered a number of projects successfully inside the department, which are concrete projects where our digital solutions experts work closely with our scientists and our policy leaders to really apply some interesting innovative technologies with immense value potential, and then realized it by working very closely in tandem. The model is now quite well accepted within the government of Canada, and other departments are also setting up their own digital accelerators, and we're working closely with all of them. So I'll share with you just a few of the quick lessons learned from the last 18 months that we've launched and grown this digital accelerator in our department. The first one, as I mentioned, is to grow a partner ecosystem. But when you think about partnering with a software company, for instance, in the past, it used to be a very traditional dollars for bits kind of a relationship, or now dollar for the cloud kind of relationship. We didn't want that. What we wanted was that, of course, if we are acquiring software as a service, there'll be a certain compensation paid, obviously, to the vendor. But we wanted the partnership at a deeper level, because we know that these large software organizations, or all software organizations, startups included, employ very, very smart people who know a lot about the world beyond just what their software does. So we wanted those relationships where we could have knowledge sharing, we could have resource pooling, we could exchange data in a responsible IP protected way, use things like data trust to ensure that we can have these relationships which are beyond just a very transactional kind of an interaction. So that's very important, is don't think of partnerships in the digital space in a very traditional dollars for IP perspective, but really think about it more broadly in terms of the complement of talent and knowledge that we can all bring to the table. The second one was focus on value co-creation. So our digital solutions architects, our data scientists, when we pair them up with policy leaders and with scientists who need our help in our department from the Digital Accelerator team, we don't work like a consulting company where somebody gives us requirements and then it's sort of like a opaque box and we do our magic and out comes the other side some kind of a deliverable. The thing that the policy leaders or the scientists have to commit to when they work with us is to work with us at every stage of that process. And that's why also we get to learn about the science or the policy domain, and then they get to also learn about the data science and artificial intelligence and all of those areas that they can then benefit from more independently in the future on their own. The third piece is tying investments to objectives. One of the issues when we are experimenting or exploring digital technologies like AI or data science is to be very much just focused on whatever's shiny, whatever's new, and constantly chase whatever is the most kind of attractive technology out there to apply. One of the things we've been working on very closely is to build a framework for valuing digital solutions and data assets. So in my organization, it's quite clear. A lot of colleagues say, we know the worth of our buildings, we know the worth of our fleet of vehicles, we know the worth of our equipment. Do we know the worth of our digital solutions? Do we know the worth of our intangible assets? And that's why having that is important, because otherwise we can keep chasing exploratory and experimental type domains without really having a commensurate business impact. Simplify knowledge sharing. And, this is very clear, is allow colleagues to use the tools that they feel comfortable using, whether it be wiki, whether it be some other kind of messaging or groupware kind of a solution with a nice interface, mobile apps, things like that. And that's really where knowledge will truly flow, as opposed to sort of telling people, hey, this is how you need to interact with each other to transfer, learn from each other. And the last part is very important, which is think about digital transformation not in a linear, continuous, or symmetrical sense. We can have these N-tier architectures or N-speed architectures when it comes to enterprise IT in our organization, which is that we don't have to all make sure that things are moving from A to B to C to D. We can, in certain cases, like when it comes to AI, when it comes to digital solutions, we can have sort of one part of the organization that is moving with the enterprise apps in a more stable, in a more predictable, in a more controlled way. And then this other group out here is building these science apps and these policy experimental apps at a completely different velocity. And then you just have to balance and harmonize how they come together. Next slide, please. So just a high-level quick overview in my opening remarks. Thank you for your patience. And this is our link. Please join us, and then we'll put this in the chat. And if you're interested to talk to us, happy to partner with you. Thanks again, Siobhan. Back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Vic. And I always love the way that you welcome people to reach out to you as well. So in the audience, please do take Vic up on that offer. Really like what you said there about digital being the bridge between the data world and the knowledge world. And love the focus. I mean, although you're talking about digital technology, it always comes down to culture and people and those human aspects. So everything you said about building partnerships, partnership of ecosystems, a partnership ecosystem, whether that's with software companies, it'll be interesting to see what Scott says about that in a moment when he talks to us, but also from the civil service point of view, the real stress that you said there, digital people working alongside scientists, working alongside policymakers all throughout that decision-making process. So it's not an add-on, it's something that's really integrated from the start. So really important points there. And finally, transformation not being linear. I like that as well. Thanks so much, Vic. Great as ever. Scott, I'm going to come over to you now.
Great. Thank you very much. So yeah, thanks, Siobhan. Pleasure to be here on such an all-star panel. So I'm Scott Adams. I'm an engineer at Palantir, and I lead our partnership with the UK government. For those that don't already know us, Palantir are a software company. Our technology platform, Foundry, solves the problems of integrating data and getting it into decisions, so getting into human decision-making processes. Our largest office is here in the UK, where we have 600 great engineers, and we're providing technology to the NHS, to central government, to the defence and security sectors, as well as the private sector. I'd like to talk about a very prominent observation that's come out in the last year. It builds on the great point that Vic just raised around the value of tying investment to objectives. And it's very consistent with a pattern that I've actually been seeing for years across some of the world's largest organizations. Can we move to the next slide, please? The observation is that the fastest way to drive sustainable digital transformation is to pick an extremely high impact, high urgency problem and solve it in the maximally digitally sophisticated way. So next slide, please. Let's unpack that. Why should we pick an important problem? Well, firstly, meaningful problems are salient. Solving them can drive excitement. This is an obvious one. The success story can then be used for evangelism, and this can drive cultural change within an organization that propagates. Compare that with another common strategy, to start with problems at the sidelines, to build solutions that are nice to have, maybe use some fancy modeling, throw in some blockchain or some other new tech that's not quite hit the mainstream yet. I see this a lot, and it usually ends in projects which never go into production, and therefore it never drives lasting change. So there's a salience point, and then the other big benefit to use high urgency, high impact problems as a vehicle for transformation is that these problems are thorny and they're difficult. When we apply tech to the problem, we need to grapple with all of the thorns and disarm them once and for all. So let's break that down. One of the big thorns with meaningful problems is privacy and data governance. When you're working with sensitive data, concerns about privacy can become a showstopper. Valuable data just doesn't get used. But when the stakes are really high, that's not an option. You need to grapple with it. You need to do the work to get the access controls right. And then that work is done for future projects. Another one of the big thorns is around collaboration and user enablement. So most important problems span many parts of an organization, all sorts of people, technical, non-technical, scientists, policy creators, engineers. They all need to come together and be empowered with information, talk in a common language. But this can only really be done, from what I've seen, when the outcome actually matters, where people have the time and the will to, and the patience to adopt new capabilities. One more really thorny issue with problems that matter is the integration that's typically required. So the most important problems are often expansive and really intertwined with the operations of lots of different systems, teams, organizations. And this requires integrating with existing processes and existing tech systems, some of which may be decades old. These integrations take a lot of effort from IT teams, and often it's a prohibitive amount of effort, so it just isn't done. So all these thorny challenges make it very tempting to just do things the way that they've always been done. But the good news is that when you commit to solving the problem digitally first, tech can lighten the load. Commercially available technology has already solved big parts of the thorny issues that I just described. And with this tech, organizations can focus on the elements and building the pieces that are unique to them. So that's often things like the analysis, the modeling, integrations, and the cultural change. So let's take an example. This is exactly what the NHS did when they decided to use Palantir as the software layer for the COVID-19 vaccination program. Next slide, please. So let's rewind to November, December 2020. The NHS has to build a completely new supply chain from scratch in 6 weeks in order to administer tens of millions of doses of a brand new vaccine. Talk about a salient problem. This matters, right? Lots of this was new for the NHS. They didn't have the luxury of a greenfield, though. That would have been too easy. Instead, they had to stand up the program within a pretty complex brownfield of existing systems, existing teams, existing processes. To make matters worse, there was a continuous stream of disruptions and uncertainty, as you will all be aware from reading the news. Basic things like what vaccines were going to be made available when, and how are you going to be able to store them, etc. As we all know, the NHS nailed it. They delivered the fastest vaccination rollout in Europe. And one of the key reasons for this is that they led with technology. So how did they do this? Can we change slide, please? Well, firstly, they solved the data integration problem that underpinned the challenge. They integrated hundreds, literally hundreds of data sources into a central source of truth using Palantir Foundry software as infrastructure. And they did this in the first 6 weeks. The data was all managed securely using a state-of-the-art purpose-based access control system in Foundry. And the result of this work was a data asset, a source of truth with hourly updates on vaccinations. And this was absolutely critical to the program's success. On top of this, the NHS then stood up more than 25 applications within Foundry, all of which went into production within those 6 weeks. These have been rolled out to more than 4,000 users. And it includes a really wide range of different tools, from specific tools like the ones GPs use to order doses of vaccines, all the way to more complex decision-making workflows with things like scenario planning, modeling, the ones where they decide where to spin up the next vaccination site in order to minimize inequalities between ethnic minorities in vaccine uptake. And these tools are traversing all parts of the digital stack, from data integration to analysis through to actually executing the action. Some of the systems, for example, the allocation and work order systems are writing back work orders into the logistics systems, which are used to actually conduct the pick overnight and get the doses and the PPE, et cetera, out to be delivered. So it's a really operational set of tools that they've spun up very quickly. How did they move so fast? Well, besides having excellent people, which they do have, they also use the best-in-class infrastructure and tools to solve the solved problems, to take them out of the way and use their intellectual firepower on the pieces that were specific to them. So in this case, that time was spent focusing on how the humans could safely interact with the technology and the data. It was configuring those 25, it's now more like 50 applications, and the models, the analysis, the decision processes that sat behind them. That was the best use of their time, and that's how they were able to move so fast. So coming back to where this fits into the NHS's broader digital transformation journey, which is a long one, as well as delivering a life-saving vaccine rollout, the NHS has also created confidence with hard evidence that leading a program in a digitally first way can be done if you have the right capabilities, and that it can be done really, really quickly with incredible outcomes. So final slide, please. The final thing I just want to say is it's also left behind a playbook for how government can use data in decision-making in high criticality contexts. And I think we're going to see this guiding future investments in these type of capabilities, both within the NHS, but even outside the NHS. We, Palantir, have seen similar results driving digital transformation across lots of different parts of UK government, and are repeatedly showing that this type of value can be generated within these timeframes. So if you're interested to see a demo of the technology or the vaccine software layer, or get our input on how you might go about replicating the work that you did with the NHS at your organization, please get in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Scott. I mean, it's really good, one, to see your big, bold statement about if you're going to drive sustainable transformation, then really choose those really big, difficult issues. And then to have that case study, you couldn't have had a bigger, more difficult issue to actually prove that. And just to see how that worked in the NHS, really, really helpful. And as you say, how the technology can deal with so many different factors changing all the time and actually provide an end-to-end kind of solution as well. But also that key thing that you're saying is use technology to just get out of the way some of the things that have already been solved by technology, so that you can focus on the specific challenges for your context. So really, really helpful. And also for the future, how it's built confidence and trust in the public that our public sector organisations can use technology so successful. So really, really helpful. Thank you, Scott. Sonju, I'm going to come over to you next.
Thank you, Sivan, and it's my honor to be with amazing panelists today. I will just briefly tell you about my ministry. So Ministry of the Interior and Safety is in charge of digital government, as well as dealing with national crisis. So my ministry has been deeply involved in policies and projects related to COVID-19, in addition to digital transformation of Korean government. So Korea's journey to digital government has been a long one. So we started in the 80s with building information superhighways to cover the entire country. And we moved on to providing e-government services in 2010. So we already had integrated data center and also the public information sharing system when government announced the Digital Government Innovation Plan in November 2019. It was to ensure that Korea e-government to become a truly digital government. So there are a few aspects of the government had to change. So in November 2019, the government announced a plan focusing on 4 core areas: service, data, system, governance. So we thought that there weren't enough service innovation to meet end users' need. It was difficult to accumulate data to its fullest potential. It was difficult to introduce and use emerging technologies in a timely manner. And last, the governance wasn't strong enough to break down silos and promote meaningful collaboration among relevant ministries. So the priorities were set to eliminate barriers for citizens so that they can enjoy services when needed without a hassle, and to strengthen public-private partnership, including moving away from traditional way of doing ICT procurement, to create more task-oriented work environment for public officials, expand the use of private cloud, and create pan-government data platform. And then COVID-19 happened. So we were fortunate enough to have a lot of our services provided digitally and systems in place to deal with the pandemic. However, that doesn't mean we couldn't continue as it was. So we had to revise the plan to better serve our citizens in this new normal. So now Korean government is working on 18 specific tasks under 4 major areas. You will notice later, but they are mostly focused on services for the citizens and how government works with private sector. So 4 areas are expanding non-contact services, innovating customized services, strengthening public-private partnership, and enhancing digital infrastructure. I will just give you a couple of examples for each area so you can better understand what we are trying to do. So first is expanding non-contact services. So we recently enacted a new law as a facilitation of a data-driven public administration. And with this legislation, we are expanding the use of digital ID and then the service that comes with it. At the end of last year, the government rolled out mobile ID for government officials. And this year, we are expanding it to driver's license and also disability ID on one platform, so that citizens can access services and benefits that they are required to just on their mobile phone without having to prove their eligibilities or provide a plastic ID card. Another important project here is My Data. So citizens will be now able to review their information held by the government. And then if they choose to do so, they can provide that information to the third party, the private company. So if I want to get a discount from my mobile carrier, before I had to get a document issued from the government and then send them to the mobile carrier because they're a private company. However, now you can just store them in your digital wallet and then send it to the third party if you want to. The second one is innovating customized service. So just a couple of months ago, the Korean government virtual assistant service was launched. It provides notifications to the citizens, and citizens can consult on 10, soon to be 34 types of services. And here, the different approach that we took here was to provide the service on an already existing platform, private platforms such as in Korea, the most popular messenger app is called KakaoTalk. It's like WhatsApp. So almost everyone in Korea is on the app, and they can access government services on an app they're used to instead of downloading another app developed by a government. And also you can choose to access the service on a Naver as a Korean equivalent of Google. The next area is a strengthening public-private partnership. So government is taking a more innovative approach to ICT projects. So before we had to went through a traditional procurement practice. It is still in practice, however, we are also taking different routes so that we can deliver services to our citizens in a timely manner. So after the peak of COVID-19 in Korea, the government decided to distribute relief funds to all households in Korea. It had to be done securely, however, quickly. If we had taken a traditional approach, we might still be developing the system to distribute the fund. However, we were able to distribute the funds to 99% of recipients within a month's time, thanks to collaborating with 18 credit cards companies here, which already holds financial information of their users. With that experience, the government is trying to innovate how it works with private sector. So in addition to the relief funds, our private sector stepped up really tremendously during the pandemic. With the open data, they developed services and then they launched services to the citizens before the government was able to do so. So in the future, we will continue to work with private sectors to make sure that the government and the citizens are prepared for any future crisis to come. So one of the ideas is to form a group composed of experts from both public and private sector, so they will have an access to necessary data when it comes to national crisis, and then they can respond to the crisis by rolling out services and designing services right away instead of waiting for the government to open up the data. And then last, enhancing digital infrastructure. So Korea is planning on building the IoT-based disaster warning system and also building 5G government network, AI-based security system to better prepare for the future crisis. So these are investment for the future. We can implement digital government right now with existing technologies, existing infrastructure. However, we want to be prepared for any coming events. And also we are expanding public Wi-Fi so that everyone can have an access to internet wherever they are. So COVID-19 definitely pushed digital government transformation efforts, not only for Korea, but also for the rest of the world. During this time, it was also clear for the Korean government that how tech-savvy our citizens are. There are still people having difficulty accessing digital government services. As a result, the Digital Inclusion Plan was established to continue building digital capabilities of our citizens and ensure that everyone is equipped with tools to access digital government services. However, in addition to building the citizens' digital ability, in my opinion, it is important for the government to also lessen the load of citizens using technology. Technology can shine when we can use it to provide an environment where our citizens doesn't have to learn new technology whenever it comes out. So one of the examples that I would like to give you here is an AI smart mirror designed to better communicate with and also provide government services using sign language. So Instead of we are starting these examples. However, we will expand services using natural language, so our citizens doesn't have to go through difficulty of learning different technologies to access government service that they're entitled to. In addition, we are also keeping community centers around the country where citizens can visit and have a face-to-face service from our government employees. As a government, in my opinion, it has a duty to serve all citizens in a way that's convenient for them, and technology can definitely help it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sanju. I mean, really interesting what you said there. Building on, I think, what Vic said about partnerships between public sector and private sector, how beneficial that can be. Great case study you gave there in terms of distribution of the relief funds. Also interesting, I think countries that we do some of these webinars with fall into countries that are progressing with digital IDs against countries that aren't progressing with digital IDs, and how different that makes it in terms of access to services and making bespoking services, for example. And then really, really important, the two things you said at the end about the importance of investment going forward in big infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and also making sure that we bear in mind accessibility, because not everybody is able to access the technological solutions. Thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, Alison, we're coming over to you now.
Siobhan, thank you very much, and hello everyone. After my intro, I was reflecting on my time leading the National Lottery, but sadly never won the jackpot, hence I'm still a civil servant. There's so much in common, I think, in terms of what the panels have already delivered. And I think I'll try and give a story that also provides some joining up of all the lessons and the journey we've clearly all been on. I've had the benefit of starting out during the pandemic in a very operational environment, being in the government digital service, and now moved to a very analytical environment of the Office for National Statistics. But what both those organizations and many of those represented today have in common is a strong data and digital behavior and thinking at the very heart of the operation, and that really makes a difference when you try and make progress in transformation. So let's move to the next slide and the one after. So this is a little bit of a story around what happened when in the UK, and I know the experience across other nations a little bit different, we all have different timelines, but we were required in the middle of March 2020 to transition government to fully remote working in 24 hours. Now, Craig has already set out the experience from DWP, and my job leading the digital function for government was to make government operate remotely in 24 hours. Now, I think I would say we've probably achieved what might be described as a very minimum viable product, because I know there is a question would have been raised about how to integrate systems. And I would say what we were able to do was break through some of the very, very first-based barriers for at least being able to do video conferencing collectively across government, something which when you look back is rather surprising we couldn't do at the time. And what the experience was for that piece of work was it wasn't a technical problem. It wasn't even a security problem. It was an operational problem in that the standards had been set at such different levels across departments for the way chief operating officers were running, for instance, and there was no mechanism for aligning those policies. You could align the digital strategies, you could align the security approaches, you couldn't align the operating models. And so we operated to, as I say, a minimum viable product. We've built from then. So much of the technology now is a huge improvement from what we were using at the beginning. And others on the panel will have their own experience and views, both on the private sector, about how you can integrate systems more effectively. The other story here, I think, is the speed at which services were sprung up, and Craig's already made reference to that. GovUK came into its own, being able to provide a central point for engagement with citizens and citizens to engage with government. And what would normally take weeks to spin up, we could spin up in days because of the approach such as the platform as a service, the templates, the cross-departmental systems that we'd already put in place meant that we had the means of spinning up new services and new components of GovUK in hours and days. And the COVID-19 coronavirus landing page is a good example. Up and running in 24 hours, just under 1 million views, and 18 million after 7 days. So it became a really significant part of the equation. Still some challenges. We had NHS web sort of models running alongside, and we were trying to be consistent. So as always, challenges in that regard. Jump to the next slide. And this is an example of one of the services that I always describe existed purely through the flow of data. So the Vulnerable People Service, the ability to send food boxes to those that were shielding, well over 1 million people. And for those that were shielding but didn't want a food box, but they wanted a priority supermarket place, for instance, we were able to take NHS data, we were able to clean it, to parse it, to engage with DWP colleagues, who then were able to check with every vulnerable person. I've got a thumb up from Craig there. Every vulnerable person, did they want food box or a priority place at the supermarket? And then we were able to pass that information to wholesalers, to the logistic operations, to the supermarkets, to local authorities. It existed because of the flow of data. Really interesting challenges, of course. Health data isn't really designed to operate in this way. And so we had to find ways of cleaning and managing the data for this particular purpose. Challenges we hadn't faced before. There were duplicate rows, not surprisingly perhaps, in a data set this large. Taking duplicate rows out meant risk of food boxes not going to people. So often we would allow duplicate rows to remain in, and then we face the criticism of, you don't know what you're doing, people are getting 2 boxes. Well, better that than none at all, frankly. This was a very successful program operating across multiple boundaries, and over 4 million parcels were established, and was an essential part of the UK program for a period of time. Let's jump on to the next slide. Now I'll look at where we are in ONS, and the next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through these graphs now, but what I wanted to demonstrate is how ONS has moved beyond being a statistical production house, producing data on the GDP and inflation every quarter, into what we described as faster indicators, the ability to demonstrate insight at pace. So this was every week or 2 weeks, using data that when you put it together, builds a rich picture. So on the left here, you're looking at data from spend. So we've got various agreements with card data showing what spend was occurring and when and how. You can see the changes related to our moments in the UK for the pandemic journey. And on the right there, you can see the journey on job adverts and the job market overlaid with the ONS survey. So these pictures coming together are beginning to be our novel data sets. And we've now added to this shipping movements. We're using automated information systems that ships give out to be able to record how much trade is happening. We're using web cameras to look at traffic within the streets. We're doing text analysis on the nature of how villages and towns are progressing in terms of their recovery. And we're also looking at graffiti now to be able to determine the health of local areas. So some really exciting stuff that we're doing in this space. And let's jump to the next slide. And this reflects something that Scott was talking about. So we were driven, all of us, by the need to react quickly. And public health has become the best example of working at pace across boundaries. So Scott was giving some examples of some quite operational uses of health data to support the vaccination program. And what we were doing alongside was building the big strategic picture for government to make some broad sets of policy choices. So we were combining census information from 2011, because that's where you can find ethnicity information, for instance, mortality rates, the COVID infection survey, hospital data and GP data that Scott was referring to, test and trace, vaccination data. You build a single public health data asset, then you run it through a trusted environment, and you can undertake research on it. So this is a picture of how the future will emerge, a focus around integrated combined data assets and not just bespoke projects that we want to run. And if we jump to my final slide, this is a picture of the future. So this is the integrated data program that we're now operating, and it's in our alpha stage at the moment. And this is looking at the world through the integrated data assets. So yes, public health, leveling up, net zero, the big topical questions of the day in a multi-cloud cloud environment with the ability to access data in situ, not another major data lake. Put it in a trusted research environment, automate it, make it usable in terms of dissemination, and you then have the future. And what we want to achieve here is the ability to combine and work with other trusted research environments to link to the nature of how health are combining their data assets and ensure that data across government flows at pace and to solve the biggest problems. So lots of exciting things to look forward to. And I think, as someone else said, there's many experiences we can all bring to this party from different nations and from our different challenges that we're facing. Siobhan, back to you.
Thank you so much, Alison. So really, really good again to get to see some of the kind of work that actually took place when you were in your GDS role. So how those different kind of data sets from the NHS, from DWP, with the help of GDS, how they were used to do things like the Vulnerable Citizens Programme that really delivered for millions of people across the UK. And then really nice to see now from your position in the ONS how the future is going to look. So we have those really big, we know there'll be another disruptive thing like the pandemic coming here, but we know we have these big policy challenges, whether it's climate change, whether it's public health and obesity, and how actually by combining and comparing data in different ways, we can get a much more efficient, effective approach to meeting some of those policy challenges. So really great to have all of those presentations. Thank you so much. We've had lots of questions come in, but the panel have been really good at answering some of those as well as we go along. So please do keep sending your questions in. But I want to kick off with one thing, because I think Sanju mentioned this, and it's come out in some of the all of the kind of conversations that we've had so far, which is, do you think there's a danger going forward as more and more of kind of government services are moved online and we do more and more of our work digitally? Is there a danger, though, that we create a new excluded community? So people who can't access those services, for example. And Sanju mentioned that they do have a digital inclusion plan, but I'd welcome thoughts from everybody else, and maybe Sanju to expand on that a bit, is to what extent is government aware of this? Are governments aware of this? And how much emphasis is being put on making sure that everybody going forward can access services, whether they are, especially as we move more and more of them to digital. Craig, I'm going to come back to you because it seems like we haven't heard from you for a long time, and this must be a concern of yours.
It absolutely is a concern for Siobhan. What we try and do is, when we are doing user research, when we're doing the service design, we need to take all user needs into consideration, including those which are not digitally capable. And we try whatever we can not to just focus on the digital element. This is about service design. It's not about the digital design element of an individual service. We'll have to think much more holistically about how this will be able to work. We already deal with other examples of exclusion for the department. So we have customers who are deemed to be financially excluded. They don't have a bank account, right? As an example, they can't get a bank account, yet we need to be able to provide them with funds. So we have numbers of examples. So this time it's digital exclusion, but when we're trying to meet the needs of 22 million citizens, there's lots of people who fall outside of the normal parameters for a normal service provision. What we do try and do is provide multiple different ways of working with us, of engaging with us. We have face-to-face, and we'll have around 700 locations across England. We kept those services open for the most vulnerable in society. We have telephone service centres. We've started experimenting with video connections. We do online journals, so a bit like a chat window, but running asynchronously rather than synchronously. So we're trying different methods to cope with this and give some options, and that's been really invaluable, particularly during this pandemic stage. However, we've got to remember there's something at the core of DWP, which is one of our strong achievements that we need to drive forward is to get people into work, and when they're in work, earn more money, progress with their careers, and have a long and rewarding life through work. We know, though, that some of these things are best achieved with face-to-face contact. right? So we already know for things like going to see a job coach, we already know there will be a cohort of people, even if it is not their choice, we believe it's better for them to see someone face to face, and we'll do that based on good analysis and data and good trials to determine what it is. So we already have to cope with it today, Siobhan. It'll be more of the same.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Sanju, I'm going to come back to you. Do you recognise what Craig is saying there? Is that similar to the plan that you have in Korea?
I think some aspects are similar, but Korea's case is a bit different. I don't, as I said before, when in the beginning of the Korean e-government, it was our citizens and then private sectors who drove the e-government development. They were way more involved in technology. They were tech savvier than government officials. However, as the emerging technologies develop quite quickly, we have to put in policies and then practices to make sure that our citizens, they don't fall behind. One of the projects, well, we still have, as I mentioned, we still have a community centers all around the country where they provide all the services in person, and we will continue to do so. However, we will use technology to equip those centers to assist the government officials serving the citizens there, and also citizens visiting the community centers. For instance, this is just an example of providing AI-based robot to assist citizens and then ask them initial information so that they can process services quite quickly. In addition to that, even though in my personal opinion, the government needs to more focused on using technologies to break down the barriers for the citizens without us having to educate them. But we are planning on having 1,000 the centers around the country where experts in IT the government will hire them to teach a class for anyone who's interested, but not just for the basic technologies, but for AI, data science, so that people in remote areas can also access high quality education for technology. Yeah. And then we are also planning to involve students there as volunteers at the center, so they can interact with other citizens and help them develop their digital abilities.
Yeah, great, thank you. Vic, your thoughts on that? That's quite interesting what Sanju's saying. So recognizing that some people at the moment can't access some of these digital services, but actually an education program to go alongside that to help maybe help people be able to become more digitally literate. What are your thoughts on accessibility?
Yeah, absolutely, Siobhan. Great points. And I really appreciate what Craig and Seongju said. I think it's very important, as Craig indicated, to really separate this notion of inclusivity as a policy objective and inclusivity sort of from a channel perspective. So I think if we conflate the two, then it sort of becomes a little bit complicated to disentangle and to say, okay, are people not able to take advantage of or participate in some policy program because they can't access it from a technology perspective? In other words, you have some website that requires a certain version of a browser at a minimum. And this can be a decision that is not actually something that is made by the government. They might have selected some software product as a backend, which then itself has some requirement that it imposes on people. So there's certainly this aspect of if it's only a web application that you can apply for a grant, for instance, and people don't have that version of web browser or don't have computers, you certainly want to make sure that there are telephones, there are maybe walk-in check-in counters, there's some correspondence, mail, fax, etc. That's one piece of inclusivity. But I think also based on what Scott had mentioned earlier around using technology such as the Foundry solution that Scott was talking about to analyze how the program itself would behave and perform under different configurations, under different settings, that can help us move forward more towards a inclusive policy perspective. And I think that's why it's important to separate these two things. They're both equal and important things to analyze. But if you start to analyze them all at the same time, it becomes a bit complicated as to, is it that people can't access it, or is it that people are excluded from it, even if they are able to access it? So this combination of channel inclusivity and policy inclusivity, I think, need to go hand in hand. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to bring in Alison and Scott on this question as well, but I also want to add in, we've got a follow-up question from Jeremy King, which is, have you found ways to manage needs digitally with an emotional element? So for example, if somebody's being bullied, discriminated against, or potentially even suicidal, can you change entrenched positions with digital? So I want to add I'm going to ask Alison and then Scott, this issue of accessibility, but also, do you think those kind of issues can be tackled with a digital approach as well, or are there some areas where always it will be a face-to-face solution? Alison, I'm going to come over to you.
I'll think about one of the answers while I'm speaking to the other. So there's so many layers to the inclusivity question, because one thing we're observing is the importance to ensure that the data we collect, analyze, and then use for policy matters is inclusive in its own right. And that can be driven by people's access to how we run the surveys, for instance, whether it's the census or whether it's other surveys, many of which are now online for the reason of efficiency and effectiveness, etc. We're running an inclusive data task force at the moment to ensure that the engagement we have with society is sufficiently reflective of the nature of how society is shaped. And that means thinking quite laterally, not just does the data reflect it, but how can we gather it in such a way that ensures it is across the piece accurate. I think on the question of emotional aspects of engaging and how to operate those kind of services, we in ONS don't operate those kind of activities, but we do have, like all in public sector, a safeguarding responsibility. And we do we do sometimes become engaged where responses from the public have demonstrated some form of risk, or where we feel there is an appropriate need for various services to intervene. So that is usually a traditional response to something that's been observed digitally sometimes. I think in broader picture for the future, we will want to be able to operate these kind of supporting services digitally as well, but probably blended. And the same way as others have said, there's more than one way of doing this. And if you take the courts reform program, that's a blending of traditional services with digital services. And I suspect we'll go down that route in due course.
Brilliant, thank you. Scott, I'm going to come to you on accessibility, but also with your work with the NHS, you might probably have thoughts around those kind of supportive services as well. So your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the inclusivity piece. I mean, our approach to making sure that users of all different profiles are getting what they need out of the data is to meet the users where they are. I wrote this in the thread as well, but there's a sort of metaphorical element of that, of make sure that the capabilities you're designing are democratized, can be democratized, both in terms of the way you're controlling access, so that you don't need to worry about sharing a tool with someone in case they see some data they shouldn't see. That should be covered by the technology under the hood. But also in terms of go and physically be with the user, test the tools against them, see if they like them. So the way that we always build is we never start with a project plan. Well, we start with a very high level project plan, but the plan is normally step one, go and sit with the user. And by sitting with the user, you get a really realistic sense for what do they actually need to do? What information do they already have? What information do they need? And this varies drastically depending on the profile, whether you're a lawyer, a customer service rep, or you're an executive. So taking an example with the NHS, you have thousands of consultants across the country, doctors who are using pen and paper in many cases to record and manage their wait lists. There are technology systems that they need to be interacting with. So what we've been doing over the last weeks and months is going embedding in the hospital with masks, and most of the team are vaccinated, but working with them to understand what they need and kind of every day we show them a new tool and they tell us, this is rubbish, I need you to fix this. And we work on an improved version of it for the next day. So that process of continuous co-building through very tight-knit collaboration with the users is the best way that I've found to make sure that, you know, whether you're non-technical or very technical, you're getting what you need. So that's one big piece of it. And of course, that's all under, it needs access control to be covered, because that can spoil the whole thing. And that comes on to the second piece. So on the emotional question, I think the angle that I'll respond to this through is on aversions to using data and the emotional risks associated with when data is being used in the wrong way. So you probably won't be surprised from hearing my presentation at the beginning that this is the type of problem that we encourage organizations to lean into. Don't shy away from it, but instead look at the devil's in the details. So look at, why is it that there is a risk, a public perception risk or an individual perception risk of using X data for Y purpose? Let's look at that. Let's see if actually there's a technical way to break the trade-off, so that rather than either embracing the problem or ignoring it, we can remove the risky element whilst also getting the upside. And so this is something that really we've been thinking about since the inception of our company, balancing trade-off, the trade-off between privacy and civil liberties. And I think technology can really help. I mean, ultimately you want to take as many sources of potential human error out of the picture, such that humans have there's literally no choice but to follow the rules, because the rules are hard coded into the way that the data is access controlled. So that's something around data use and the emotional responses to it.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm really conscious that time has flown and we've probably only got time for one more question really, and I'm going to have to ask you all to answer quite quickly. But before we do that, just to say to the audience, thank you so much for sending in all your questions. Really good questions. A feedback survey has just gone round, so you should find that in your inboxes. Please do take a couple of seconds just to fill that in for us straight after this, if you are able to, because it means that we can make sure we provide the kind of events and conversations that are most useful to you. So thank you in advance for doing that. So for my final question, actually I'm going to be sneaky and get in kind of a double header here, and you can answer one or both of these, because we've had a final question come in very quickly from Ruth, which is she's interested in knowing what technologies are being used within the United States and how are they helping people in America who are not digitally literate to have access to those systems. So if anybody does have any specific examples, and I might come to Vic first on that just because of proximity there. And then my question is, you've all mentioned how well governments have done in moving fast throughout the pandemic, in changing their processes. Do you think there's a risk that civil servants might revert to type and that we lose some of this progress? And if not, if you're optimistic, why are you optimistic that we will embed some of these changes going forward? So you've only got about 30 seconds, I'm afraid. I'm going to come to Vic first. Over to you, Vic.
Thank you, Siobhan, and thank you, Ruth, for the question. Without getting specific about countries, one thing I can quickly say is how can a user design be more human-centric? And really, like everything that Scott said, is that it needs to be something which is the product of co-design. So incremental, iterative, interactive design with the intended end users, number one. And number two is very, very important, is not to think of software delivery as a destination, is to think about it like a journey. So even if you miss, due to unintended consequences or inadvertently, certain user groups or certain groups of humans that you want the software to touch, please make sure that you keep an open-ended mind frame to then having a phase 2 and a phase 3 and a phase 4 to increase the inclusivity of that solution. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Vic. And are you confident going forward that we will not revert to type?
Yes.
Brilliant, that's great. Songju, I'm going to come over to you.
I want to be optimistic. However, people tend to, it's really hard for people to change. And I know the last 18 months has been very difficult for everyone. And then many of us hasn't experienced it before. So you might have a different effect for the government civil servants. And even if we tend to revert back to the before, we have legislations and the policies in place that was developed during the pandemic. So I think that will be sort of a guideline that keep us moving forward rather than going backward. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So you're optimistic, but with a bit more of a nudge, I think, than Vic. Scott, I'm going to ask you for your thoughts about the future.
Yeah, so on the future, I think that there's an element of once you've seen how something can be done, you can't unsee it. I think that lots of people have been afraid of, for good reason, afraid of the innovation that technology can bring and the disruption it can bring, especially in the health system, where the consequences of failure, if there's a data leak or information, a bad decision based on some bad model, the consequences can literally be like life or death. So I think there's been a very sensible hesitation, but again, by demonstrating that it's possible to manage the risks through thoughtful use of technology, through engaging with the details of a problem and breaking it out into what's already been solved and what can we solve, it's possible to overcome these issues and get to a place where we're actually really happy with the result. So I think the operational work on the vaccine program, the kind of playbook that's been left behind there is it's something that's not going to be forgotten, and we're already seeing that it's sort of starting to influence the way that other parts of government are thinking. So yeah, I'm very optimistic, and I think that I'd be very surprised if we're having this conversation 1 or 2 years from now and things have reverted.
Brilliant. I love this optimism so far. Alison, are you going to be equally as optimistic? You did set out a vision for the future in your slides.
No, precisely. For that very reason, I'm going to say 3 steps forward and even 1 step back would be brilliant. So I'm going to say I'm confident and optimistic for 4 reasons. 1, it has now become the norm, stuff we're doing already and we're talking about. 2, the art of the possible has been demonstrated. 3, I think we've whet the appetite of those that want to consume and use the services we provide. And 4, those users, be they our citizens or ministers, now and expect and demand what we have demonstrated is possible. So we've got both the supply and the demand going. I'm very confident.
Fantastic. I love this. Craig, started with you, so I'm going to finish with you. Can you top this optimism?
I've got no intention of, Siobhan. What 4 brilliant answers, which I completely agree with. I too am very optimistic. Put bluntly, we will not be allowed to go back to the way it was. The world has just moved on now. I would have 2 caveats though. This was an extraordinary event where we had something which trumped every agenda. That's not normally the case right the way across government. And the second thing is we know that we really burned individuals and teams to make this achievement, and that's not sustainable. So the switch to how we did perform under the pandemic is not going to be sustainable going forward. But going back is just not an option. It's over. That part of our history is now done. It's going forward from here.
Fantastic. That a really good word of kind of pragmatism there. Yes, we did this, but it was exceptional, and we do need to take stock now. And people probably need a bit of a break as well. They've been working flat out. So, but really nice to hear all of you so optimistic about if there is a silver lining to the period we've been through, it could be the legacy of how we do digital transformation faster and better than we were previously on track to do. I'm afraid we are out of time. I just want to say a huge thank you to our audience, but especially to our fantastic panel, to Craig, to Vic, to Scott, to Songju, and to Alison. Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time, your insights, and your expertise. I hope all of you who have been joining us today have found this useful. There will be a link to the video, so it's been recorded, so you can watch it again and share it with your colleagues. And we will also send around a link to an article in the coming weeks that will pull out all of the key points from today. And finally, I would also like to thank Palantir Technologies again for being our knowledge partner. It was really good to have you with us today. I wish you all, wherever you are around the world, a really lovely rest of the day. And I hope to see you at another one of our webinars very soon. Bye to the audience, bye to the panel. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.